Welcome to Depth of Field, an independent filmmaking podcast hosted by Dr. Mike White and Shelby Haggerton, independent filmmakers and industry professionals. Episodes will touch on recent films, the state of the industry, the regional scene in Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, the occasional gear discussion, and interviews. Stay up to date with our current episodes on Spotify and YouTube.
Okay, welcome to this edition of the Depth of Field podcast. We want to apologize. We have both been a little bit under the weather, and then we're also in production working on Shelby's new short film, The Entomologist's Wife. So we are terribly off schedule, but we're back, and we wanted to go ahead and make sure that we cover all these things this week. So this is what we'll call the early July edition of the Depth of Field podcast. On this episode, we are going to talk about the importance of having a deck. And we'll get into that just a little bit. And then, of course, we have House on Rockingham director Stephen Folker, who's a friend of ours, who is our special guest on the show today. Okay, so Shelby, let's get into it. So first of all, I want to talk about what the heck is a deck, or sometimes a pitch deck. What is it and what's it used for?
Okay. So a deck is essentially, well, there's a couple different ways that you can use a deck, but I think the main way that we're proposing the deck today is if you are pitching a film for financing, for investors, even sometimes just to be able to get additional people to want to work or be interested in the film in general. Fundraising, the deck is what is going to be there to help you pitch your film. It will answer, essentially, your deck should be the catch-all for all questions about your film.
Yep.
It should cover, the tone of the film, the feel of the film, anybody involved in it that has already signed on, any important actors, and your plans after the film as well, distribution and where you're looking.
And we're going to go through a detail of what should be probably in a good deck. When we take a look at the decks that we have developed, and I know you develop commercial decks for pitch projects all the time. When we look at those, I've developed them for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes for grants. Almost every grant is looking for a deck to be able to go ahead and do that. Also for financing, of course, when you sit down with people who are looking at financing your film. Also, too, I would say one of the most important reasons to develop a deck is to clarify the vision of the film and to get everybody on board on the same page. Yeah. Because it is going to go ahead and answer a lot of really relevant questions. I think some of those are like, when we take a look at genre specifically, what other films are like your film? And from a film history perspective, if we look at Casablanca, people don't realize it, but the only reason Casablanca was made was because of a previous successful picture that looked a lot like Casablanca called Algiers. And if you're familiar with Warner Brothers cartoons, Pepe Le Moco, or what eventually became the character Pepe Le Pew, is based on an actor from the film Algiers. But if you look at that film was made because of another successful film. And when you look at large market films all the time, they do try to emulate success. And it's the complaint that people get in the industry, but past results are an indicator of future success. So it is one of those things that people are looking for. So what I would like to do is kind of go through the different things that would be in your deck. And we have kind of a checklist of essentials that we'll kind of go through. So let's start with the first one. So Shelby?
And I will say too, just before we get in, it's also creating a deck is a very good thing to be able to understand the film yourself better, I think too.
I would agree with that.
Being able to go through the process and really be able to work it out in your head, because it is a really great list of like everything that needs to be done. You're doing just not only to present, but also to organize it for yourself, which is great.
All right.
So first thing you need is a title slide. This needs your film's name, obviously, your logo, if the film's title has a specific font, presentation of it, also probably any logo that is associated with your production company. And then also it should be designed to keep genre in mind. So I have a script called Faces of Lilith that I've shopped around, and I have Lilith on the cover of it, and it's dark and it's very femme, and it represents the feel of the film.
And don't be afraid of trademarked material. This is one of the rare opportunities of maybe you don't own an image, but it's okay to use that image because it's not going on the internet. It's not going anyplace. It's just going to be an image that's going to be used, we'll say, internally. So it is one of those rare opportunities where you could use, copyrighted material because you're showing it. You're saying, okay, well, this is like that. There's no money being made from that image. Yeah. You're just basically using it as a reference.
And obviously you shouldn't be putting, if you're making something that, I don't know, looks like a Christopher Nolan film, don't put a Christopher Nolan film in the background of it. Maybe find something that kind of emulates that same feeling. Save your references of other films for later in your deck, but definitely find something that emulates kind of the feel that you're supposed to.
And honestly, I kind of create mine in PowerPoint, knowing they're going to be printed, but I create them in PowerPoint as individual pages. I know other people use different things, but for me, it works really good because if I have to do a digital presentation, it's ready to go that way. Mm-hmm. Also, there is really good output to PDF using PowerPoint. So using that format usually works really well.
You can also do it in InDesign. That's a pretty industry standard for designing decks. That's what my company uses at Made by Things. But yeah, creating a deck, and then you can also export that into PDF and use it that way too.
Your second section should be your synopsis. And here you're going to have like a really concise, kind of a compelling summary of your film's plot. You want to kind of try to get maybe kind of the essence or the essential things in there and just do it in a few gripping sentences. A synopsis is different than a logline. A synopsis does have the elements of the film, and you can have spoilers in there too, because you are trying to go ahead and do this. Then your log line, and if you don't know what a log line is, you need to look that up and learn about it. But a log line, which is going to be just a very, what you would usually see maybe if you were cruising through, Netflix or, HBO Max, that line or two, which is just going to give you a quick summary of what the picture is going to be about.
And there's some good stuff online to be able to create really strong log lines. I mean, one of the things here with your synopsis, and this is something that, was really, really heavily pushed on us at Emerson when I was getting my MFA, is your synopsis. Don't be afraid of just telling the whole film. It's okay to have spoilers. You are trying to sell your script. You're trying to sell this so it can get made. The people that are looking at it, they want to know what happens in the script, and they want to be entertained while they're reading it. And they don't want to get lost. So keeping it concise, if you're trying to sell a fantasy piece and your fantasy world requires a ton of backstory to be able to understand it, and like your entire, if the first, half of your synopsis is just background, that's not keeping your audience. So it's getting to the point, keeping things moving. What is this about? Who is it about? And why do we care? And what is your ending? And then your log line as well. It's very important too to maintain cause and effect in your log line of this is happening to this person. How are they responding to it? Why? And what is the hook to be able to keep us wanting more from that? There's some really, really great examples online. You can look up a ton of log lines. Like one of the most successful ones is Harry Potter. It's a perfect log line. It's very straight and to the point. It's a boy who gains magical powers, and that's a really easy thing to sell. So yeah, there's great examples.
I'd say the next section is what we call the inspired successful works. To me, this is probably the most important part of the deck. This is where you say, all right, there are particular films that have been successful that this emulates. So for example, when I did like The Cross, I looked at like Mudbound by Dee Rees. I also looked at Ragtime by Milos Forman and some of those kinds of things too. Keep in mind who your audience is a little bit. You may, if your film is going to, not be, a complex indie that has a really film savvy, educated crowd, you may not be able to have those kind of references. You might be able to have broader references, maybe 1917, so you could go ahead and do a film like that. Try to make those recognizable. And I always try to find really good images from those as well. And that really for me, especially like when I look at like The Cross and now the film I'm working on now called The Painter, the tone of the film, the aesthetic, what it's going to look like, what the visual experience is like. I try to find films that work there.
Well, and it's an important thing too, because when I'm looking, especially as a producer, if I'm looking at somebody's work and I need to know what this is going to look like, it's not going to be, a lot of the other things in here will help, but getting that tone is what's going to set things in motion for me.
Yeah.
Another thing too is if you are shopping the script around and you're talking to different studios or different directors or whomever, I don't like to think of the deck as something that's very it's kind of nailed down and that's it. And once it's been printed off on paper, that's it and you can't change it. I think it's important to keep in mind who you're pitching to. So if you're creating a film and you're pitching to Universal, maybe put a Universal film that looks like something they've made in the past, something that was successful in your deck.
This is where you should pander a little bit.
If you're trying to create something that A24 would like, maybe you should use A24 films to try and sell it as well. I mean, obviously this is the rare time you should probably pander a little, where you say, listen, your production company is the right fit for this project. And make it, they should feel like they are your only option. Like they are the ones to be making this film and you should be working together. But also at the same time, don't kiss up. So have a good mixture, but keep in mind who you're pitching to.
Yeah. And I think too, when I look at the inspired works, and because I have students that do this, I have them develop decks, as part of classes. I think one of the things is looking at what it's going to look like from the standpoint of color and cinematography. This will help you determine a lot of things, equipment needs and camera styles and lenses and in post-production colorization and all of those kinds of things. If you're thinking about those now, I mean, even before the pre-production stage, because I don't really even consider the deck is pre-production for me, because you're not in the development stage. It gives you more of a map for that pre-production phase.
I would also say too, something that's important, even beyond just pitching to other studios, if you're trying to get a grant with a deck, maintaining what the grant is, why the grant exists. So for instance, if you are, like for me, I'm a female filmmaker, if I am applying to a grant that is specifically to help women's stories in film, I'm probably not going to make a list of all films that were solely directed by men with male characters as a lead, because it doesn't make sense for that grant. And they're probably not going to be interested in the film, even if the script is great, because it just doesn't fit that voice. So it's understanding the voice and how to connect with that person that's going to be looking at your deck.
And I think at the end here, we'll talk a little bit more about grants and about developing, the deck for grants specifically.
So your key characters need detailed descriptions to make them memorable and relatable. This is something, again, you don't want to get crazy detailed in this. You don't want to be, in the weeds of, Megan is, this big giant backstory for Megan. And then now Megan is this. It's, who is Megan? Megan is 30 years old and she owns a cat cafe and she is having a really hard time with her mother and very to the point, simple. And then we get the description of the mother, maybe why Megan's having a bad relationship with her mother, just through our descriptions of this person.
I always ask myself, why is this character interesting?
Yes.
That's the big one.
Why are they interesting? Why should we care about them? And why are they important enough to move the plot forward?
Yeah. Actually, if you ever watch The 40-Year-Old Virgin, there is one of the main characters, one of the friends that's in the picture, was not really written the way that he ended up being. They had a casting and they said, well, one, we're going to change the character's race. And they cast a black actor who put a very funny spin on the character and stuff. That character was not originally written that way, nor was it in the deck that way or described that way. And that was a conscientious decision that was made after casting. Yeah. So that was something that you want to leave it a little bit open, and you may choose to change genders of characters. You may choose to change orientations of characters. We live in an age of diversity, so you want to make sure that if it's possible to try to have as diverse a cast as possible, that is very attractive to financiers and especially to grants to have a lot of diversity. So keep that in mind.
I will say too, that's a really important note, is don't get hung up on the appearance of your characters. That's a thing that I see a lot from young filmmakers, is they get into their heads of, this person needs to be 5'9" with ginger hair and, weigh 120 pounds. Like this, like that is the image in their head, and that is it. And that's all they stick to. It's really important to maintain an open mind in this, because somebody might see the script, love it, but if they think that the character is too narrow, casting might be more complicated. Unless your character, like for instance, the movie Tall Girl on Netflix, right? You can't make Tall Girl with somebody who's 5'3". You need somebody who's tall. So that's a very like that we know that this person needs to be tall. Any other information is unimportant to that appearance, and doesn't really require any description there. You know, hair color, hair can be dyed. People can wear wigs. Keep it loose and keep it open.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think too, like right now, I just like the painter, we added a character named Dot. And it was very specific. And we had a conversation like, well, who is Dot? Well, we made it so Dot doesn't really have a physical description. We have the main character, Lily, right? And Lily is actually, she dances. So she has got to be a little bit athletic because she's a ballerina and some things with her. But Dot, her friend, could be basically any body type. Dot could be, you know, there's a specific age range, but we've left that very open. Yeah. Also, you know, we wrote the character of Megan, who's an Irish maid. She could be an Irish maid in her 40s. She could be an Irish maid in her 70s. She could be an Irish maid at any age. So we've left that open.
And her body type is also very
we try to leave those fluid. And I think also too, from the standpoint of casting, and I don't want to get too off track here, but it makes it easier to cast when you have a wider swath. And you can cast for talent rather than appearance. And I think that gives you a greater angle in some ways too.
Well, and it's a really big difference, especially if somebody's written, novels or short stories or, like live in a world of prose. Obviously, those descriptions are going to matter a lot more. But when you're writing a script, you're writing for visuals. Nobody is going to, most likely, see your script after the film is made, unless they're really looking for it. So you need to keep in mind that this is going to be visually on screen, and that's how those people are going to be presented. And they're going to be presented through real life people and not the descriptions on the page.
And the next one is kind of a related one when we talk about character descriptions. Sometimes I combine these two. Sometimes I leave them separate.
Yep.
So you can have character descriptions and then a separate cast list. Now, if you have cast the picture, and when we do a deck, we're almost always cast by that time.
Yep.
I always put in past work. If they've worked, what their experience is, their education,
a headshot,
a quality headshot. I always try to make all of them black and white. If they give me a color one, I convert it, because some people give you black and white ones. Some people will do color. I try to make them uniform.
And that's also a very good note for actors. If there's any actors listening, to have quality headshots with nothing in the background and try not to make a selfie.
And then what we'll do is we'll put those in. And then of course, those headshots will go ahead. And if they have awards and other things, they want to see the success and experience of people that's in there too. And maybe you've got someone who hasn't done much film, but maybe they're a really established stage actor, or maybe they've got a really quality education.
Include that information.
I mean, we get actors and we look at their resumes. I mean, for people who've gone to acting school, for people who've had formal acting educations, we look at those, we read those, and we call those folks. So, I mean, we are looking for that when that comes in, and your financiers and your other people will be able to do that. For small independents, you can't always get Keanu Reeves. You can't get those people to do that. So without a name, you need to say, listen, this is going to have quality performances. And that's a really good place to do that.
But also sometimes if you are able to attract a name, if you're able to get, especially if you're making an indie film and you're able to get kind of more like a B, C, D list actor, it's important to keep them on there, because that's going to be more attractive. You're more likely to get funding if you already have somebody with a name attached to your project. So this is a good place to be able to highlight them.
Absolutely. Okay.
So next you should include your setting and location. So giving a state and city. So obviously if your film is like this takes place in Chicago and there's no other place that it could, be, include that. It's going to be Chicago, Illinois. Beautiful. But be mindful of grants and tax incentives. Okay. So if you write a film, a fantasy film, especially like Lord of the Rings, much of Lord of the Rings is shot in New Zealand. Okay. But you're an indie filmmaker. Does your film have to be shot in New Zealand? Could it be shot in Oregon or Washington? Or someplace where maybe you could create, maybe you need a desert. You need to go to the Sahara Desert. Maybe not. Maybe you could go to Arizona. finding alternative locations as well is important. And also with the grants and tax incentives, where is it that makes the most sense to shoot? Iowa and Nebraska. I think Iowa got their tax incentive.
I'm not sure.
Remember.
I haven't heard any news, but I know Nebraska
did. So maybe it makes sense if you're going to create a film that takes place in the Midwest. Maybe you go to Nebraska because there's a tax incentive there. Or if you're trying to apply for a grant, Iowa has the Greenlight grant. Maybe Iowa's the right place. Your setting location, more than a backdrop, and showcase visuals and descriptions of the main setting and how those contribute to the story's mood and narrative. Those are really important parts because something that I think we get lost in, especially as screenwriters, if you are the person that wrote the screenplay and you're trying to shop it around, we get kind of lost on the locations because it is such a visual medium. It is important to maintain that idea when you're creating your deck of how does the location play in this, because location can be just as much of a character as the actual people that are acting in your film. How does weather play into this? How does the environment, create a different feeling for this character? Nomadland is a really great example of this because you have somebody who is traveling across America, and you have somebody that's, in South Dakota and Nebraska, and it's a really special feeling that you create out of that you wouldn't get someplace else. How does your environment impact your characters is important and should be showcased in your deck.
And this is a place where you need to probably drop a little bit of the sentimentality.
Yes.
That's the one thing. Like, for example, we wrote a grant and it was for Iowa. It was going to cost us more money to shoot in Iowa, but we put all of the locations in Iowa because we wanted to win the grant. And we did not win that grant. And when we didn't win the grant, we did some of it in South Dakota and some of it in Nebraska. We saved an extraordinary amount of money by doing that. Because those grants and incentives are to get you to produce in that place. And if you don't produce in that place, it's okay. I mean, that's all right. And I know people are like, well, I live in such and such state and such city, and I have an extraordinary amount of pride, and this is where I'm going to make it. But is that necessarily the place that's going to be the least expensive place to produce it? Is that going to be the place with the best resources? Is that the place that's going to give you the best production value? The production has to be first in that. So it is something that we want to keep in mind.
And not everything needs to be shot like in New York or LA.
No.
There are other alternatives. I mean, if you need a city, Chicago also, you don't have to shoot in Chicago, but it's a less expensive option for sure.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of other cities, Kansas City, Minneapolis, even like in Iowa, Cedar Rapids. Cedar Rapids is a great place to be able to shoot. Iowa City, Des Moines, Omaha is a perfect place.
Omaha's got tall buildings. You can fake some stuff.
Yep. It's just important to keep in mind of, you don't have to use, if you need a city, find a city. You don't have to make it New York or LA unless you need a very specific location in those places. But I mean, most likely you can kind of create that where you are in a less expensive area. And that is something they'll want to see in your pitch deck because they want to see that you're flexible too.
This next section is probably the place that most filmmakers are weakest. And this is going to be your analytics, your target audience.
Yep.
So something you want to look at is who is going to watch your film. And this is the wide swath that you want to kind of create. So right now there's a Minions movie. Why do Minions movies do incredibly well? Because the target demo is incredibly wide. You can be 7, you can be 70. And that's what they're looking for in that particular case. That's not to say that, that one, your horror movie, is going to have a smaller audience because it's going to be rated R. It's going to be whatever. That's not to say that that will scare people away, because it won't, because there is an audience for that. But you have to be able to say, this is the audience and this is the kind of viewership, and also understand your distribution placement in there. Can you have a theatrical run? Can you have an art house run? Can you have a distribution run? And be specific in your distribution run. Where can this go? And I think when we took a look at The Cross, we had a couple of different distributors that we had talked to on the phone. We'd also went ahead and had a pretty good idea of what we could do. We did not expect to have a regional theatrical run, especially a successful regional theatrical run in theaters all over the place. We didn't expect that, but and it wasn't in our pitch deck, but it is something that did happen. And now, of course, we're on the other side of that, looking at, okay, what are our online distribution options at the end of that? And they're pretty wide.
Yep.
Now, if I was to develop a pitch deck as I will for the painter, when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and look at, okay, well, what are our online distribution things? And how can I capitalize on those existing relationships? Knowing who your audience is, and not just knowing the audience, but how to distribute to that audience.
Mm-hmm.
And this needs to be in there. You need to look at that and give examples of other like films that were successful.
Yep. I think too, I don't think it's a bad thing to have a niche audience. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it's just important to be aware of it.
And how to reach them.
And how to reach them. A really good example of this is like LGBTQ films. If you're a queer filmmaker and you're making a film for queer audiences, the queer audience is statistically going to be a smaller margin, right? Mm-hmm. But they're a really, really important margin because queer people tend to be more on social media. They're very active on social media. They're posting about things that they like, and they're very involved in culture. Mm-hmm. So when you're speaking to that specific audience, you have to understand how to reach them and know what that they are a great audience to be able to mm-hmm. share and to communicate with each other. So knowing how to speak to them is important. And that goes for anything. I mean, A24, they are a really, really great distributor. They know exactly how to reach the audiences that they're looking mm-hmm. for. And that's what makes them have successful films. I mean, there's a lot of horror movies that get distributed through A24.
But they're
that probably wouldn't be reached otherwise.
Narrow distributor.
Yes.
What they take is very small. Uh-huh. So if you take a look at like Neon takes a much wider swath of independent films. And I would argue too, is probably a much more profitable,
But from a niche audience perspective, though,
both.
They're both very aware of where the film is going to land.
And they know how to market to those places.
So then also the budget breakdown, including lots of detail and having a clear overview of estimated costs. Okay, this can become very complicated, and I think it's important to not do this alone. Yeah. If you are a writer, get a producer involved. If you're a director, get a producer involved. Always, always, always try to have a producer or a line producer or somebody who has worked on film sets and worked with budgets for films before to help you be able to mm-hmm. narrow these budgets down. Because you can definitely present a certain budget. I mean, maybe you have a film that you think you need $1 million for. Okay, great. What are the percentages that are going to be underneath that $1 million film? But also, could you maybe make this movie for $50,000? Possibly. How do you narrow that budget down? What would it look like in distribution?
Well, and know how much money you have.
Yes.
I think one of the situations we run into is people will say, oh, I'm applying for a grant and I have this much money, but do they have that much money? So the thing is that being able to go ahead and say, this is the money we currently have. This is where it came from. This is our guarantor money mm-hmm. on this too, because it's going to save you later having to scramble and say, oh my gosh, hey, wait a second. We didn't have our guarantor money. And now we've got to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. It's important to be aware and be realistic in this section about your budget. Mm-hmm. Because maybe you have a fantastic script and you can get a few $1 million behind it. That's fantastic. But also, especially if you're a first-time filmmaker, mm-hmm. a first-time writer, it could be very difficult to be able to get a budget like that behind you. So being realistic and understanding what that budget could potentially look like is important, and just getting people on your team that know how to work with those budgets.
And I would argue too that when you kind of take a look at like these budget breakdowns, mm-hmm. what is the potential of earning back investment? I think that is a really big part. People sometimes get a little bit upset with me when I say, well, shorts really don't have any market value. Because what do you do with a short? A short mm-hmm. is typically a concept piece or a festival piece, but very rarely will a short earn back its investment. Shorts tend to be educational exercises, proof of concept exercises to go ahead and say, hey, listen, this is a scene. We're going to shoot a scene from the painter that we'll take 100% loss on because that is a proof of concept. Mm-hmm. We know that coming into it. But if you're asking people to invest, what is the earn back potential of that? When we look at an industry where a lot of films lose money, you've got to be very, very careful in that too.
Yeah. Projected earnings is important. And again, that comes from working with people who have done this a million times. Yeah. And it's a very weird state, I think, in the industry right now for being able to project those. Babylon is a really great example of that. I spoke to the head of marketing for the Babylon film, and they're like, well, we expected it to do a lot better than it did, and then it didn't do a whole lot.
And it's a terrific picture.
And it's a terrific film.
So
but it's being able to project what the realistic earnings of that will be.
Yeah.
I mean, Barbie, another great example. They told the reason they got that film made was Margot Robbie promised that it was going to make $1 billion. That was their projected earning, and it did. It made over $1 billion. So it's being realistic, knowing what it could make, and including that.
When we take a look at this next section, this is your distribution potential. If you have an agent or you already have a distributor in place, this is where you're going to mention those folks. If you don't, one of the things you want to talk about is, what is your distribution plan? Can you distribute a film on your own? Absolutely, you can. You can definitely do that. There are ways for you to go ahead and bring your film to Film Marketplace. There are some ways for you to go ahead and do that. There are some ways to do it. I do believe agents work, but you have to have a good agent, and you've got to be able to go ahead and be able to get the right offers. And I think that's something too. If you have a distributor in place, have that figured out. And maybe you don't already have a distributor, but maybe you have a past relationship with a distributor. And we have a friend who's a filmmaker, and he's had good luck with a particular distributor. That distributor's already told him, said, listen, if you've got another picture, count on us. We're going to distribute that picture. So,
and that's something to include in your deck.
Absolutely. It is something to go ahead.
I think too, I'm going to go back to the budget for just one moment, because I want to mention, grants in this. If you're applying for a grant, state how the grant will be used.
Specifically, you will have to report back on grants and how grant money is used.
So have an understanding of that. But then going back into distribution, having a plan in place, even if you don't have an agent. I mean, a lot of us, especially, South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, a lot of people don't have agents. They are their own agent. Know the paths to distribution that are outside YouTube. It's great to be able to put stuff out on public, but also understand some other paths for getting your film seen.
Yeah.
That might be tasty to, potential.
That old YouTube model is kind of gone for distribution. Finally, I want to talk about the team overviews. This is really important about who is on your team and why they're on your team. Something from the standpoint also of grants is grants sometimes like to have the team is all 100% Nebraska filmmakers or 100% Iowa filmmakers or whatever. And that's fine. But also you have to consider, is this the best team? Too. And for us, we try to keep it as localized as possible, but also too, we've got someone from out of state that is a much, probably a better cinematographer and colorist and stuff too. And I mean, you could dig around and stuff, but maybe it's something you're not familiar with or whatever. That's okay too. But you want to keep that in mind. And also keep your past relationships in mind. Like who is on this team that's going to work? Yep. Again, another reason to make a short film is to get a team together and see how they gel. Because sometimes if you say, okay, we're going to shoot, a feature and we've got 18 to 29 days of principal or whatever in this. And if that team doesn't gel, oh boy.
Shorts are an important time to experiment, not with production and with your filmmaking, but also with your team. Because if you hire somebody and you're stuck with them then for a month straight of shooting.
And if it was in your deck and it was agreed
they are going to expect that person to be on that for the rest of the time. So having a short is a great time to be able to actually get used to that person, understand how they work and if it will be a good fit. But I think also in here is a good place to mention, and I know this sucks to say, but don't just hire your friends, because they're going to look for somebody that has, past work, that has, a good background in this. And you can definitely have, people on your sets that maybe don't have a background in this. This is maybe their first film they've ever worked on. We use a lot of students on our sets, but that's not always the thing that we're going to use in our pitch deck.
No.
We're going to use, that we have the credible cinematographer and a colorist, and these are the people that we're going to have involved in this as we're trying to sell the film.
And I always tell people too, it's great to love all the people that you work with, but it's not just an 18 to 30 day hangout session. You cast the best actors, not necessarily the friends that you love, and also crew wise, you should be using the best crew you can possibly use all the time. And if it's a short and it's just kind of, just
for fun,
that's great.
48 hour,
go ahead and do that. But if you're looking at a project that you're trying to get some return on, or you're trying to get some distribution, or there's a model in there too, it's really important that you do that. And I'm not saying that you can't give inexperienced people opportunities. I mean, I'm a teacher. I do that
it's a very
every
good
single
thing to do.
set. Yeah. The Cross had a lot of people that were very inexperienced that worked on there that learned a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. But in this list, you should highlight the roles of your above the line staff.
Yep.
And for people who don't know that term, there's above the line and below the line. Above the line is also what we refer to executive staff.
Mm-hmm.
So producers, directors. I also include cinematography, colorists, maybe the head of, Gaff and Electric, all of those different types of folks.
I also include like the head editor in that as well.
Yep. And your post-production people, the people that are your heads of post-production.
Animation, graphics. Yeah.
Yeah. To show that you've got people, and we want to highlight their roles, their experience, their contributions. And maybe they've been on big projects and you want to celebrate that past work, the credibility of these people.
Yep.
And that really shows the potential success of the project and those kinds of things as well.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree.
Awesome. So as a synopsis, you should have a title slide, a synopsis,
with a log line,
inspired successful works, character descriptions, and cast list. Those can be combined. Settings and locations, target audience, a budget breakdown with detail, distribution potential, and your team overview. Now, you can add additional things as well, but those are the ones that we kind of feel are the essentials.
Yeah. Like, for instance, you may add something additional if you're applying for a grant. They may require some additional pages in your deck for that application of the grant.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other things too. I mean, if some studios will want specific things from different pitch decks, I think it just kind of depends. But these are the essential key pieces.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think also too, if you're doing a deck for a grant, look at their criteria very closely and see if you check those boxes.
Yep.
Okay. And we've had situations where we've applied for a grant and we feel like we've checked all of those boxes and like we were a shoo-in to win the grant, and then we don't. And then one of those things is there are some invisible things. Sometimes there are diversity things in there too. Sometimes there's things, for a while, there was a grant we knew of that you got an extraordinary number of points if you went to one of the state colleges in that state.
Look for those.
Yeah. And
mention it.
And the people who won the grant at that time had gone to those schools. It was almost impossible to get that grant if you didn't. They've since changed that. But I mean, when you take a look at, those types of things, there are some diverse advantages that people want to take care of. And that's also encouraging for you as a filmmaker to diversify your executive staff. Yep. If they look at the executive staff and said, well, how diverse is our executive staff? That's the case.
Agreed.
I think that's it. Well, guys, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next segment. Awesome. Okay. And on our next segment of the Depth of Field podcast, we've got our friend Stephen Folker on, and I am probably a bit of a fan of Stephen's. I've always known about his stuff. And then, of course, we had just been online friends and finally got to meet and hang out just a little bit at the Iowa Motion Picture Association Awards this year. And it was just terrific. And I don't think Shelby had known Stephen prior to that either.
We hadn't met either prior to that.
Yeah, so it was really great. But first of all, Stephen, Big fan. Welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank you.
Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started making films?
Yeah, so I'm a professional photographer, and when I was a kid, I used to want to make films and did stuff for like public access and made films around the neighborhood. And wanted to go to film school. That was kind of like my dream, but it didn't happen. Didn't go to college or anything like that. And I don't know. I guess one day after a hiatus, I reconnected with an old friend. We made a short film, and that kind of got the fire going again. And when I first started making films, I thought, okay, I want to be an actor and I want to direct films and write films and everything. And then I realized I just really liked being behind the camera. I loved yelling at actors. And I decided, you know what? This is where I belong. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a good story or not, but that's just kind of me. I mean, it's like most filmmakers, I've always had a passion and just one day said, screw it, I'm going to go for it.
And I hope you don't mind. Once in a while, I'll get on your page and take production stills of Stephen working, and you are really the one-man show. I mean, it is, you've got a system device where you're able to do your lighting and your shooting and your stuff. And it is really interesting. And I think as a teacher, it's like, listen, you can do this the way Stephen does. So can you speak to that a little bit about the little system you have developed of your own and being able to produce with such an incredibly small crew?
Yeah, well, the short answer is I don't work with a crew. I do everything solo. And it's, for a lot of people, it might be a turnoff, because a lot of people say there's a pecking order, there's a way you're supposed to do it. But I look at, some of the great early filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez, who made El Mariachi. I mean, he made that film by himself with, at the time, a camera that was like 20 years old. And then even for the audio, he just like, after he did the tape, he had like a little Radio Shack recorder, and he would record the lines real quick. And his lights were like little clamp-on lights you put in a garage. Now, granted, he got very fortunate with his career at a time where it was probably a little bit easier to get into Sundance, and a bunch of doors were opened, and his career exploded. But even to this day, he's a director that does film a lot of his own movies. He doesn't necessarily work with a cinematographer. But I guess that kind of correlates with my style. It was frustration, because the first short film I did, I had all these film school graduates from Chicago and, kind of educating me on the way to do things. And I just remember thinking, why is it taking 4 hours to do a 1-page scene? And the outcome wasn't as good as it should have been. And so I thought, screw it, I'm going to do this myself. And the other big hiccup I had early on was a lot of my short films. Most of my early films suck. I'm not afraid to say it. I mean, we're filmmakers, you get better. But I always felt like the audio wasn't as good as it could have been. It sounded like we were in a tin can or something. And there was always a reason why the audio didn't sound good. And I thought, well, maybe it's the equipment. Maybe we don't have good enough equipment. And the truth is, that doesn't matter either. But eventually, when the pandemic hit, and really what got me doing this myself, is I thought, I'm going to make a feature-length film with no crew just for the heck of it, because I have nothing to lose. And COVID hit, and a lot of people got nervous, and they kind of bailed out, which is normal. I don't blame them. I get it. And right around that time frame, I got a call from a network in New York to just film an interview for a new show. And I had no idea what it was, and they wanted to know if I had a crew. And I said, no, I don't have a crew. Well, then they wanted to know, if I had specific gear that they wanted. And it was like super high and expensive gear. And I'm like, no, I don't have that either. You don't need that. It's a sensor. 4K is 4K. And so I sent them some test shots. They hired me to go out and do this interview. And they wanted me there like 2 or 3 hours early to set up the lighting. Well, I was ready to go in like 15 minutes. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're done? Yes. And after that, they're like, well, do you want to film this whole thing yourself? I said, sure. So I filmed it, and then I filmed another one, and then I filmed another one. And I asked the editor, I'm like, what is this even for? Is this like some internet show or something? He's like, oh no, this is going to be on A&E and Hulu. And I was like, oh, okay. So, but anyways, that kind of opened the door, and even the producers that I work with, and these are people that are big in the TV business. They were kind of shocked at how I do things because they're used to bringing in 15 Pelican cases full of gear and all these different people for all these different departments. And I'm this guy with these little mirrorless cameras and a little DSL or a little Tascam recorder going, "Yep, we got it." And I think that kind of changed how they thought about things. But I figured, you know what? If I can do that for a national TV show, why can't I do that for a feature film? And I think once you get a couple professional credits like that under your belt, people stop questioning your ability. And I have this whole thing now with when people hire me to direct or film a movie. If they ask me what I'm filming on, I don't work with them. That's my caveat. So anybody listening, if you ask me what camera I'm using, I'm not going to work with you. It's a stupid question. It doesn't matter. It's a tool. And if you ask that question, you're a tool, because at the end of the day, you're hiring an artist for their style, and it's no different if you write a screenplay. Are you a better writer if you have Final Draft, which I don't like, or Celtics, or Studio Binder, or a piece of paper? No. You're either a good writer or you're not. And it's the same with people that get hung up on, oh, you formatted your script wrong. Get out of here. Most of those people have never even sold a script in their life, and they're the most judgmental, douche canoes out there. So I think the whole moral is just do what you want to do, and don't worry about what anybody else thinks.
It is a tough thing. I mean, I've been working on something and I just had a whole bunch of problems with Final Draft today. And I was like, everybody sees me whining about Final Draft online. But you know what? I did a bunch of work with Writer Duet, which is free, and it never gave me any trouble at all. And I'm so on board with you on some of that stuff. That's, I mean, there are times I think that you need to have some process, but there's times that you just don't, and I really appreciate that an awful lot.
Sure. I am interested too, because House on Rockingham came out and it was received really well. It was an IMPA this year. How did that process, and especially you as a writer and a director on that film, how did your process of kind of the one-man show really come into play in the development of this film, especially as a feature?
I think I treat it like any other project. If it's my film, it's an idea. And in this case, I had a friend of mine. I've known him for many, many, many years. And originally, he was going to help me finance the film. And he had passed away kind of out of nowhere. But when I wrote the script, it was kind of like, hey, I got this idea, and hey, show me what you have. And I think I wrote the script in 4 days or something. I mean, I probably should have put more thought into it, but I tried to write something that could be done for dirt cheap. So in other words, not a lot of locations, not a lot of actors, because I think that's kind of the secret sauce, right? Is don't overcomplicate it. But I think the hardest part, like on this particular film, was mainly just we were in an older house, and normally I try to film and get done in one room before I move to another, but I kept switching rooms back and forth, and it was like constantly moving stuff around. That'll wear you out. But I don't know. I'm kind of a non-traditional filmmaker, so like Rockingham, I shot in I think 9 or 10 days, but it wasn't like 15-hour set days. It was kind of like some of the days it was like 6.5 hours, and I just told the actors, I'm like, look, I'm tired, I'm going home, and that was it.
It's about 65 minutes, right? Is that what its length is?
I think it's an hour and 18 minutes, something like that.
Really fast shoot
That's crazy fast for a feature that length.
Yeah.
Because the cross is exactly an hour 30. We were
18.
Oh, I'm sorry, 18 days of principal on that.
Oh,
and
wow.
It was 18 long days on that.
Like 12-hour days.
12-hour days.
Oh, man. I'd be taking a nap.
Well, there's two of us too. So, but I mean, I think I really like the color, the look of these kinds of things. I know you had kind of, and I won't ask what you shoot on because I don't want to get, I don't want to lose a job.
Oh, it's okay. You can ask me.
You're able to really push that equipment real hard to
Mm-hmm.
get a really beautiful image in it. I'm really thinking of some of the lighting dynamite. I really love some of the amber tones and stuff in it as well. Love and look of some of that stuff. But as you mentioned too, that you kind of use it's a small body camera that you use though, right?
Yeah.
There it is.
this well, this is one of the cameras you use. Yeah, yeah, this is a Sony A7 IV, and I also use an A7S III. And I used to have an FX3, but I sold it because I wanted the viewfinder, and it's the same sensor as the A7S III. But back in the day, Blackmagic, I shot my first few features on Blackmagic. I still think the color science in that camera is better than the new ones today. It has a softer filmic look, and I do a lot of film photography, and I've done professional photography for over 20 years. When I started my business, I still shot film, and I think the original or regular Blackmagic and Pocket One looks more like film. But I don't know if you remember shooting on that, but like it ate light like candy. I mean, you had to really light the heck out of anything to use it.
And there was a really good interview. Shelby and I both listened to it. It was on No Film School with the guy that owns Blackmagic, or the founder of Blackmagic. I guess we can't really say he owns it. But he talked a lot about how everything is developed in the color science.
Mm-hmm.
Like even DaVinci Resolve is developed with the color science in mind because he was an editor, a post-production guy.
So everything is designed.
Yeah, so everything is like that too. And I think, being a teacher, I've shot in probably every incarnation of the Blackmagic family, except the new 12. We have a 12K, but not the new 12K. And we're going to start shooting on it in anamorphic. We just got anamorphic lenses like last week. But that, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but their camera only supports ×2 anamorphic. It doesn't support 1.5, at least in the model we have. So we had to order a little additional Ninja monitor so we can see what we're shooting. But and it's got some advantages to it, so there's some kind of cool things in there. But it's kind of nice. I mean, I think it got kind of popular for a while there to kind of smack talk Blackmagic, but
they're great.
I've had good luck.
They are good, and I kind of like caved in and bought a Blackmagic 6K like 6 months ago. I sold it, but it was just basically with my workflow being a one-man band shooter. It's not that I can't pull focus and all that. I mean, of course I can do that. I do it all the time, but it's just you have to get all these external battery solutions, and the storage takes up a ton. And at the end of the day, the Sony with the compression, it's so quick to just back the footage up, and 4K is more than enough for what I'm doing. I don't need 8K or 10K or whatever. Yeah, I think the new Nikon Z6 III looks pretty awesome. I mean, it shoots internal RAW, and now that Nikon has bought out red cameras, I'm kind of curious what they're going to come out with.
Well, listen to some earlier episodes of our show. We have a whole episode about that Nikon camera. We have a whole episode about the Nikon camera. So that I think you're right, though, and I think that merger is going to be some really interesting things for Nikon. So I think it's going to be really, really cool. But you have Folker Films. So tell us, what do you have on the cooker? What do you have coming up?
Pretty busy here because I've already done. Let's see, I did a 35-minute short for somebody, a little micro short, did a feature, and I've got another feature in less than 2 weeks to shoot. And then in September, I've got another, it's like a mid-range film, like 35 minutes. And then I do freelance screenwriting for a publishing company. So I've got just booked a job to write a screenplay for somebody. So I've got too much stuff, but I'm a business guy. So if I can do something every day, I will, because I run 2 businesses. So I'm blessed to say that I earn my living doing filmmaking and photography full time, and it's just go, go, go. But so that's why I kind of like, for me, when I earlier the comment about like gear and stuff, it's not that I'm not a gearhead. I'm a nerd. Like I read all the reviews and watch the videos of, ooh, I want that camera. But at the end of the day, it's like, if you want to make money as a business, at some point you have to stop obsessing about that stuff because it's not going to make your work any better. And one of my friends, he's done a lot of films for budgets and, 7 figures, 6 figures, whatever. But he used to be a colorist for Technicolor. And what he told me was, it really doesn't matter what camera you have. I can color grade them all to look the same. But naturally, on some of his bigger budget things, yes, they do shoot on reds and stuff. But that's because they're pushing the image so much in post that they need that extra file size. But for a lot of us filmmakers doing smaller stuff, I mean, well, let me ask you this, and I'll tell you the answer. What do you think is the number one issue that most independent films suffer?
Probably getting quality sound is probably the second.
You hit it right there. Sound is the most important because yeah, story is everything, right? But sound is everything. Then story, and well, you have to have good actors too. And a lot of independent films don't have great actors, so then there's that other caveat. And but man, how many films do you watch and it's like they're talking into a hollow can or something? It's so echoey and distorted. And that's my pet peeve. And that's, like for me, that's where I try to invest a little bit more. Like this year, I invested and got, better lavalier mics. I got Cost 11Ds and I use sound devices from my mixer. And even though the quality is, even like a Zoom recorder sounds really good, it's maybe it's 10% better. But if you have a Zoom or a Tascam, that's okay. Those are great recorders. They're phenomenal. It's just learning how to do mic placement and how to eliminate clothing rustling and setting your levels correctly. Because even things like 32-bit float are overrated because 32-bit float doesn't work for virtually any of the lavalier systems, right? Because you're limited to the actual mic pack. So and even the whole approach, a lot of people they get like a shotgun mic and then they'll do that for the whole film, but shotgun mics are not designed to be necessarily for indoor and outdoor, and that's why you get a lot of echo too. So I know that's where I try to focus is just education, and I'm not an expert in audio, but I think I can make a lot of audio people have a run for their money. It's just trying to do better. That's what I'm trying to do.
We did that about 2 years ago. We went through and we had the Zoom recorder and then of course shotgun mic and all the stuff. Then we went through and we made a really conscientious effort to go through a massive revision of 100% of how we do sound. And that was, we changed our shotgun mic system. We changed our cabling. We went to floating point because it is shotgun. And then we went ahead and did that. And then in post-production, we went ahead and did some things with AI in post-production to get some clarity and stuff too. And that's not an artistic thing. That was a tool thing. So we're not, no ethics issues with the AI on the sound. But we went ahead and we went through, and I think for certain things, I think it's great. I mean, I think, the sound correction stuff that we got on it is absolutely fantastic. And I mean, I think something that you've brought up is people have to be willing to always be learning and always say, listen, I have a system that works, but I have a system that can be improved. Yeah. If those systems are dynamic, if they're changing all the time, I think it's better. I mean, even like right now, we've decided that we wanted to do a bunch of things in anamorphic, and we're learning to go ahead and do these things in anamorphic. And we have anamorphic zooms that we're working with. I've only worked with, anamorphic primes, so that don't zoom. So, I mean, that was a change. I mean, I think a lot of it is just, I don't know. I don't want to get real weird about it, but like being willing to grow, being willing to change, being willing to look at your systems and say, what can be better? Yeah. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I agree with you all day, man. And, with AI, I know that's kind of a hot topic with a lot of people because they're worried about their jobs being taken away, but it's not going to go anywhere and it's not going to replace crap. But if you have something like audio, we talk about audio, a lot of these NLEs have good AI built in where you can fine tune your audio with one click. Now you still have to do other things, but the whole point is if you have a good recording, it's going to make it really crisp. if you have a shitty recording, it's not going to fix it 100%. It'll just make it maybe usable. So, you still have to do something good, and even 32-bit float, you still have to have proper mic placement. If it's pointed the wrong direction, you can't fix that. It's toast.
Yeah. And some of the AI stuff especially like when you talk about the noise floor and they're working with the noise floor, the AI stuff is so good that like what used to take me hours and hours of working at a noise floor, it just does it.
Yeah.
I mean, it just does it. It takes so much time away from things. And it's like, and that gives me time to be creative. I mean, it's like that time I would be done doing some mundane, monotonous task that the AI does. That now I'm free to be creative. And that frees me up to go ahead and do that, I mean, I guess you could argue that, well, you're taking time, that mundane task could go to somebody who needs to, I don't know. To me, it's just a better tool to make me more creative.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. All right.
Cool. So, Stephen, where can people learn a little bit more about you and where can they find your works?
Well, I mean, I'm not as active on social media as I should be, but on Instagram, it's Folker Films, and then same thing on Facebook, and then the website, same name, folkerfilms.com. But yeah, I mean, I try to post every once in a while. It's just, I'm sure you get it. You get busy doing stuff, and you just kind of neglect it.
Well, Stephen, it's been super fun having you on the show, and it was really great to have met you at IMPA this year. It was just one of those things that I guess I had always intended to meet you, and it was really fun to get together and talk I wish we would have had a lot more time than we actually did, but it was cool. We're just going to have to make a point of hanging out more.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. It's really good to.
Well, guys, don't miss House on Rockingham. I know it's available on some platforms, and I even saw it on pay-per-view. So I think it's just for a couple of dollars, I think you can watch it.
Yeah,
so
check it out.
Do that. Support Stephen Folker and support that film. And then we're always really, really excited for great filmmakers. And I can honestly say too, I see there's a lot of great filmmakers and Stephen's definitely one of them. So we're thrilled to death. So, but everybody, of course, we're going to see you in a couple of weeks. We're off kind of a week a little bit because I got ill. Shelby got ill. We've been kind of super busy working on a bunch of things. But don't worry, we're going to be back on track and we're going to have every other week episodes until this fall when I start my program at UCLA. So, so that kind of thing is going on. So, but until next time, we'll see everybody on the Depth of Field podcast on all your favorite platforms. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to Depth of Field, and check us out on YouTube and Spotify, where we post new episodes every 2 weeks.